Pi is 3.14159265, but you came here for Pocket Ronnie, so please stay tuned.
Okay, we're going to be evaluating and verifying trig expressions. For these problems, you need to look at the reference angle and you need to take into account the sine of what the angle is, of what quadrant it is in. Only in quadrant 1, only in quadrant 1 is everything positive. Okay, if your angle is in another quadrant, you need to look at what the sine is, depending on the quadrant, and use the proper sign. Okay, so we're going to be doing two different things, evaluating and verifying. In the three problems I'm about to do, we are evaluating. Whenever you have a problem and you have no answer to the right of the equal sign, that's evaluating. Okay, so for these three problems, we will be evaluating, in other words, finding an answer for these trig expressions. Okay, so we're looking at 10A4. So for all of these are all gonna, I think most of these problems for this lesson should fall under special triangles. In other words, the reference angles should be 30, 45, or 60 degrees. And those are all angles of special triangles. Because remember, these are all right triangles. So like for this would be like 45, 45, 90 triangle. So here we have 3 times tangent of 45 degrees. When you have this coefficient out in front, that implies multiplication. Minus 2 times cosine of 45 degrees. All these problems, you will be putting them in radical form. Okay, we're not going to turn this into a decimal. Okay, we're going to be using the radical forms for these. So, tangent of 45 degrees, you either have it memorized or it's on your formula sheet. But tangent of 45 degrees is 1. So this means 3 times 1 minus 2 times cosine of 40 degrees is 45, square root of 2 over 2. And we're going to find out an answer for that. We can turn this into a fraction by putting it over 1. Multiplication first. So this is 3. You use order of operations, PEMDAS. So 3 times 1, 3. Over here, fraction multiplied by fraction. My 2's cancel. And I'm just left with square root of 2. So the answer for this problem is 3 minus square root of 2. Can't combine whole numbers and radicals, and so we're going to leave it in that form. Okay? Now let's go down to 10B number 2. We're just finding answers for these. Okay? Evaluating means I'm finding an answer. There's nothing to the right, so I'm finding an answer of cosine of 30 degrees squared plus sine of 30 degrees squared. This means cosine 30 degrees squared plus sine of 30 degrees squared. But when we use trig functions, we put our squared between the cosine and the angle. But this is what it means. So cosine of 30 degrees is in quadrant 1. Everything is positive in quadrant 1. So cosine of 30, looking at your formula sheet, or if you have it memorized, cosine of 30 is square root of 3 over 2, and we're still squaring it, plus sine of 30 degrees is 1/2. You need to square that. Okay, squaring this means, I'm just going to write it out long, square root of 3 over 2 times square root of 3 over 2 plus 1/2 times 1/2. Leaving it in radical form, square root of 3 times square root of 3 is square root of 9. Square root of 9 is just 3. 2 times 2, 4. Plus 1/2 times 1/2, 1/4. I'm adding fractions. When you add fractions, you need to make sure you have common denominator. 3/4 plus 1/4 is 4/4, which that is 1. Okay, now we're looking at 10A3. Secant of 45 degrees plus cotangent of 45 degrees. 45 degrees is in quadrant 1. Everything is positive in quadrant 1. So Positive world in quadrant 1. Secant of 45. Okay, I don't have on my formula sheet, or I don't have memorized secant of 45, but secant is a reciprocal of cosine. So I can look at cosine of 45 degrees, and cosine of 45 degrees is square root of 2 over 2. I'm just going to make a note over here. Cosine of 45 degrees is square root of 2 over 2. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine, so I need the reciprocal of that. So secant of 45 would be 2 over square root of 2 plus cotangent of 45. Cotangent is reciprocal of tangent. Okay, so tangent of 45 degrees is 1. So reciprocal of 1 is just 1. Adding fractions, I need to have a common denominator. First thing I'm going to do is get rid of the radical in the denominator over here. Okay, that's the first thing I need to do. How do I get rid of that radical? Multiply them both by square root of 2. Therefore, I have 2 square root of 2 over square root of 2 times square root of 2 is square root of 4, and square root of 4 is just 2 plus 1. Turns out I'm not going to need to make a common denominator. What happens to my 2's? They cancel. So I'm just left with square root of 2 plus 1. Or it can be written as 1 plus square root of 2. Same thing, because addition is commutative. Okay, now we're going to be verifying trig expressions. When you're verifying, you have your original problem has something on the left of the equal sign and then something on the right hand side of the equal sign. So when we're verifying, we're going to verify that this equals this. The way we're going to do that is we're going to substitute in a radical, or in some sort of radical form, for tangent of 60 degrees and secant of 60 degrees. Okay, so here this is 1 plus tangent squared 60 degrees. Just as a reminder, this is 1 plus tangent of 60 degrees squared, and then this is secant of 60 degrees squared. Just as a reminder what that square means. 60 degrees is in quadrant 1. Everything is positive in quadrant 1, so all my signs will be positive. Okay, tangent of 60 degrees is square root of 3. So this is 1 plus square root of 3 squared equals, secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So cosine of 60 degrees is 1/2. So secant is reciprocal of this. So secant of 60 degrees would be 2. So that would be 2 squared. So we know the right hand side is 4. We're trying to prove or verify that the left hand side is 4. So this will be 1 plus, this means square root of 3 times square root of 3. Just writing it out the long way. Okay, square root of 3 times square root of 3 is square root of 9, and square root of 9 is just 3. So 1 plus 3 equals 4, and we can see you should be going all the way down to where your left side equals your right side. So we just verified that 1 plus tangent squared of 60 degrees does equal secant squared of 60 degrees. And that was 10C2. Okay, now we're going to look at 10C number 5. First thing I'm looking at is my angles. I have 300 degrees, 210 degrees. I am not in quadrant 1 anymore. When you're not in quadrant 1, you need to look at your signs. Okay? First off, I'm going to rewrite this like this. This is 2 times cosine of 300 degrees squared equals 1 plus sine of 210 degrees. Okay? Just to draw this on a little graph, 300 degrees, what quadrant am I in? I'm in quadrant 4. That's a positive. That means I would be rotating around like this. That would be 300 degrees. So what is my reference angle? 60. So that right there would be 60 degrees. And I'm dealing with cosine. Okay? So cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So if I'm standing here at this angle, the side adjacent to me is right there. So if I was to go here and down to get to this point right there, I went in the positive direction there, I went in the negative direction there, the hypotenuse is always positive, okay? So if I'm standing here at this angle, adjacent over hypotenuse, a positive over a positive. So therefore, cosine of 300 degrees in quadrant 4 is a positive number. I'm just going to put a positive there. And we will use 60 degrees as our reference angle, okay? So if you look at your formula sheet, we'll use 60 degrees for cosine of 60 degrees. Cosine of 60 degrees is 1/2, and it would be a positive 1/2 because we're at 300 degrees is in quadrant 4. Cosine is positive in quadrant 4, and then we're going to square it and then multiply it by 2. Equals 1 plus, now let's look at sine of 210. 210 degrees is going to be in quadrant 3. So here we got 180, somewhere around there. Okay, so that is 210 degrees. So what is your reference angle? If this is 180, then this should be 30 degrees. 180 plus 30 should be 210. So, and if I drew myself a triangle here, here, if I'm standing at this angle, I'm dealing with sine, okay? Well, if I was to get to this point, I went in the negative x direction and negative y direction, because I went to the left and then down. Hypotenuse is always positive. So if I'm looking at sine, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. That would be a negative divided by a positive. A negative divided by a positive is a negative. So sine of 30 degrees will be negative in quadrant 3. So our reference angle is 30 degrees. So looking at your formula sheet, a sine of 30 degrees is 1/2, but we're in quadrant 3. Sine is negative in quadrant 3, so you need to have a negative. These signs tell you what quadrant you are in. They're very, very important. If you don't believe me, you can go put in 210 degrees in your calculator, hit your sine button, and you should get negative 0.5. Okay? With that being said, now we're just trying to prove that one side equals the other side. We have to use order of operation. 1/2 squared. That means 1/2 times 1/2, which is 1/4. Make sure you do your multiplication correctly. So, this is 2 times. 2 times, do our exponents first, now multiply this. Equals 1, I'm just going to get rid of my 2 signs, 1 minus 1/2. 2 times 1/4, you can cancel. That will become a 1, that will become a 2, 1/2. Or you would see it's 2/4 and you reduce down to 1/2. 1 minus 1/2, you can go through the process of making common denominator, but also if you have one whole cookie and you subtract off half of a cookie, you only have half of a cookie left. But I will go through the process of making common denominator just to prove it. If that was like 1/1, we multiply these both by 2. You basically have 2/2 minus 1/2, which is 1/2. Just went through and proved the math. So basically we proved that the left side is equal to the right side. The left side is equal to the right side. We verified it. Okay, we're looking at 10D2. If you look at all my angles, you can tell we're not in quadrant 1, so we need to figure out what quadrant we're in so we can use the appropriate sine and the appropriate reference angle. So I'm just going to draw my little graphs off to the side, and then I'm just going to write up above each one of those what we're dealing with. So first off, let's look at tangent of 315 degrees. So 315 degrees means we're in quadrant 4. So that would be 315 degrees. That would be 315 degrees. My reference angle right there would be 45 degrees. So if I drew the triangle with my reference angle, To get to this point down here, I went in the positive x direction, the negative y direction. My hypotenuse is always positive. I'm dealing with tangent, okay? Tangent is opposite over adjacent. Opposite over adjacent means a negative divided by a positive. A negative divided by a positive is a negative number. So up above here, I'm just going to write that that reference angle is 45 degrees, and I know that it's going to be a negative number, okay? I'm just writing that down, okay? So let's look at tangent of 225 degrees, okay? So 225 degrees, that's going to be in quadrant 3, because that's going here, that's 225 degrees. So my reference angle would be this, going back to the x-axis, so that would be 45 degrees as well. To get to this point, I went in the negative x direction, and then I went in the negative y direction. Hypotenuse is always positive. I'm dealing with tangent. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. If I'm standing here at 45 degrees, opposite over adjacent. Negative divided by negative. A negative divided by negative is a positive number. So I know that this is going to be a positive number, and my reference angle was 45 degrees. Okay, let's look at cosine of 150. So 150 degrees, remember that's 0 degrees there. 150 degrees, and they're all positive angles. That means I'm rotating in the counterclockwise direction. 150 degrees puts me in quadrant 2. So this would be my reference angle, which if that's 150, this should be 30. And if I drew a triangle, going back, reference angle goes back to the x-axis. So to get to this point up here, I went in the negative x direction, and then I went up in the positive y direction. Hypotenuse is always positive. I'm dealing with cosine, so if I was standing at this angle, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. A negative divided by a positive. A negative divided by a positive is a negative number. So I know that's going to be a negative number. And then my reference angle is 30 degrees. Okay, let's look at secant of 330 degrees. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine. Okay, so I'm going to be dealing with still cosine. So 330 degrees. If we graph 330 degrees, that's 0. 330 degrees puts us right here in quadrant 4. It's going all the way around, that'd be 330, which means that this angle right here is 30. I went back to the x-axis, that would be 30 degrees. So looking at this distance going to the right is positive in the x direction, go down the negative y direction gets me to that point right there. Hypotenuse is always positive. So cosine. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. We are dealing with secant, which would be the reciprocal of that. Hypotenuse over adjacent. My hypotenuse is always positive. My adjacent side is positive as well, because if I'm standing at 30, this is my adjacent side. So positive. A positive divided by a positive is a positive. So therefore this will be a positive number, and we said my reference angle is 30 degrees. Be consistent to write everything the same. Okay, so now I am ready to start putting in these actual numbers in radical form. So going back to this, my numerator. 2 times tangent of 315 degrees. Okay, tangent of 315 degrees, our reference angle is 45, so you can look at tangent of 45, which is 1. And we said it will be a negative number, so that would be a negative 1. All over 1 plus, that's my 1 plus, tangent of 225, my reference angle is 45. So tangent of 45 degrees is 1, and we said it would be a positive. So tangent of 225 degrees is a positive 1. Okay, equals. Now let's go to the right hand side. Cosine of 150 degrees. Our reference angle is 30, so we look up cosine of 30 degrees, and that would be square root of 3 over 2. And we said that would be a negative number, so that should be a negative square root of 3 over 2. This together implies multiplication. Cosine of 150 times secant of 330. So I'm going to put that in parentheses to imply multiplication. Secant of 330. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine. Okay, so just for a second, I'm going to actually just write down cosine of 330 degrees so I can get the reciprocal of that. So cosine of 330 degrees. We said that the reference angle is 30 degrees, so cosine of 30 is square root of 3 over 2. We said it was going to be a positive number. Okay, so cosine of 330 degrees is square root of 3 over 2. I need the reciprocal of that because secant is a reciprocal of cosine. So I will be using 2 over square root of 3 for the reciprocal. Now it's just a matter of doing all your math. 2 times negative 1, I'm switching to blue just because my red is acting up. 2 times negative 1, negative 2. All over 1 plus 1, 2. Going on to the right hand side, multiplication, multiply the numerator, multiply the denominator. Does anything cancel out? Yes. Square root of 3, that cancels. That cancels. So all I'm left with, these are just a bunch of 1s. 1 times 1 is 1 over 1 times 1, which is 1. 1 over 1. Don't forget your negative here. Negative multiplied by positive, negative. So this came out to negative 1. Negative 2 divided by a positive 2, negative 1. So we verified that the left side equals the right side. In the original problem, this left side does equal the right side, and that is the goal of these problems.